Good morning, everybody here in the room and online. As you've just heard, this meeting will be recorded. So if you don't want to be recorded, then you should disconnect and listen to the broadcast. Welcome all to the second day of this Info Day meeting. And I would also like to especially welcome CMDV members sitting here at the back row who will attend this meeting today as well. I think we've got an interesting program ahead of us. First with clarifications from actions for industry in 2023 and beyond. Then a session on pharmacovigilance, and we're closing with a session on innovation in Europe. I would like to hand over to the chair of today's session, which is Noemi Garcia del Blanco. She is the head of the Veterinary Biologics and Emerging Therapies service here in the Veterinary Medicines Division at the European Medicines Agency. Noemi is a veterinarian with postgraduate qualifications in microbiology and infectious diseases. She's worked for more than 15 years in the area of animal health. We hired her some time ago from the Veterinary Medicines Directorate in the UK, where she'd been heading a team of for the assessment of biologicals, overseeing the authorization of biological products, batch release of vaccines, and ensuring consistency and adequate quality and providing advice to industry and other stakeholders. She also has been the alternate member of the CVMP for the UK for more than 2 years and a member of the Scientific Advice Working Party. So I think she's the perfect person to chair the session in this morning. Noemi, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ivo. Thank you for the introduction. Just extend a welcome to everybody to the second session of this Information Day. I want to just start with a few housekeeping rules, please, before we start the session, which are that all the presentations will be made available on the events webpage in the upcoming days. As Ivo already said, the event is being recorded. So if you don't want if you're not happy about this, just please leave now, and you can still follow the meeting via the broadcast, and the recording will be made available also in due time. If you're experiencing audio issues, please try to exit and reconnect again. And I think my colleagues will add in the chat the details of the contact of our colleagues in where they can help you with any technical issues. By default, all attendees are muted, so be aware of that. The questions, please type them into the chat, which is in the lower right corner of your screen. Then we can see them and we can find the right person to answer them. Later, there's some time for questions after the first round of presentations, and then there will be another opportunity for questions and for discussions at the end of the sessions. We may not be able to answer all of them, but we will do our best. And we can take some of the questions from, on the moment, even if they are not typed in the box, but please start adding them to the box because it's easier to manage. And with that, I think I have said everything I had to say. So we can start with the session. As Ivo said, it's going to be very interesting, touching different topics. And the first one is going to be provided by my colleague, Jana Szalaski. Jana is the head of the Veterinary Strategic Support Office here in the Veterinary Division in the agency. She joined the agency in 2003, and she has been working in different roles in the division. And in 2016, she held the program manager position for the veterinary change program, preparing for the implementation of the regulation. In 2021, she was appointed the head of the Veterinary Strategic Support Office in the division, providing strategic advice to all levels of division management and with a special focus on the implementation of the veterinary medicine regulation. So please, Jana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Noemi, and good morning, everyone. So we are just going to give a short presentation, perhaps, on actions for industry. We have done this once before at the Info Day, and it seemed to have been received quite well. So we decided to repeat that with some more up-to-date information, I suppose. So if I can have the first slide, we jump straight in. We've heard about the volume of sales yesterday as well in several presentations. So just a quick recap on this, and I'm going to add a little extra at the end. So the submission of the 2022 volume of sales for veterinary medicinal products, I hope you all know, is due by June 2023, so this year. This is following a message that was circulated late last year, I think, extending that deadline basically to the end of June. If you need guidance on that, that is available in Chapter 7 of the EU Vet Implementation Guide. We have the link here. Once the presentations are published, you can click on it as well, but I hope you know that document as well. And then there was a webinar held to introduce how to do that for MAHs in September 2021. So this is now quite a while ago. I've added the link here, and what we've taken away from yesterday and the discussions we had there is that maybe it's time to repeat that, and we are basically starting internally to look at whether we could do a specific webinar for MAHs on the submission of volume of sales as soon as possible. So it's not going to be next week, but we will prepare something and communicate that as well. Also, I would like to note further clarifications on certain fields that are in the submission file will be published in Chapter 7 shortly. So we have just revised it, and I would expect that update, which literally it doesn't contain any changes to what you have to do, but it contains some more information on, like, more explanation on what you have to do. In Chapter 7, we expect to be able to publish that by the end of this month or shortly after. So watch out for that. Next slide, please. So why is the volume of sales important? Of course, because yes, we've heard the comments yesterday about it as well. It is definitely an exercise. There is, of course, the legal obligation. So you have to submit the annual volume of sales. That's in the regulation. The regulation became applicable on the 28th of January 22, which means conversely that the first submission is due in early 2023. And as I said, we circulated a message late last year that we would extend that deadline from our side to the end of June 2023, as the functionality only really became fully available in January. Now, why are we doing it? It's essentially, we see it, or we planned it as an integration that is meant to achieve some administrative simplification. So to reduce duplication of effort, submitting different things to different systems. So what we try to do here, and the way it was designed with the involvement of industry representatives and NCAs as well, of course, was that it facilitates the data exchange between systems. So it fulfills the legal obligation, but also in the context of big data, as mentioned by Ivo yesterday as well, or a small part of big data maybe, we have to receive that data. That's the legal obligation. But then obviously we should be doing something with it. So what we will do with it is it will enable us to publish incidents of adverse events from 2024 onwards. So that's another legal obligation that we're going to fulfill. And so the intention then is to use the volume of sales and the information provided in the file to basically derive the incidents that will then be published. So the system development for ADR reports EU, so to integrate that publication of incidents most likely on ADR reports EU, that system development would start in Q3. And then you can imagine, obviously, we need information from the volume of sales submissions because we need it for testing at the end of this year, and also obviously to be able to publish from 2024 onwards as legally required. And then on a side note, we are aware that some NCAs or the competent authorities, they're not necessarily the national competent authorities, intend to use the UPD volume of sales as a basis for preparing their sales submissions for antimicrobials. And again, the first submission here is due in 2024. The system development is ongoing, and obviously those authorities that will submit that and would like to use the UPD volume of sales also want to test how that works out for them for at least a little while before they have to submit next year. So next slide, please. Now, we've heard some reports about the quality of the package information in UPD, and that seems to be an impediment to, in some cases, to prepare volume of sales. So the volume of sales submission is, of course, based on a specific package. So MAHs need to map against those packages. And the information we've received recently is that some pack IDs had been changed. So basically, some packs that were there before had been deleted and then re-entered essentially as the same package, but under a different identifier, so a new identifier. We are looking into that. So we've only heard about this week. We've started looking into it. It really doesn't affect many member states, many products. It's a very, very, very small percentage. We've run some analytics. The NCAs have been previously informed through communications and trainings that changes to pack information should be entered under the same pack ID. Obviously, not a new one. And what we will do in that context is we will reinforce that message next week. And also, we will try to apply further data analytics to extract some information that could be shared with MAHs. And we would extract that from the change logs and essentially try to give you the information which of your packs are affected by this so that facilitates your mapping exercise. We are checking what information we can extract there that might be helpful to you, so bear with us on this. Next slide, please. Then I'm moving on to availability status. So the updates to the availability status of products and packages per country in the UPD. There is no specific legal deadline that we can see, but it is listed in the regulation as an MAH obligation. And this information is essential to veterinarians and the general public using the public UPD portal. This is really the information that they're most interested in, right? So is the medicine I want in the pack size that is useful actually available in my country? There were some final issues with the functionality that are being resolved right now. So the functionality will be available fully functional in the next release, which is on the 2nd of March. Just as before, the guidance on how to submit that, how to update that information is in Chapter 7 of the EU Vet Implementation Guide. And again, we held a webinar to explain how to do that in January 22, which is available on the EMA website. And I haven't heard any specific comments on this, that it would be useful to repeat that webinar, but if you feel that might be useful, we can do that for this functionality as well. Next slide, please. Okay, then moving on to VNRAs for the QPPV and PSMF information in the UPD. So you are aware that you are requested to enrich the UPD, especially in relation to the QPPV and PSMF information for your products. And as a vague deadline, we have put here as soon as possible. A technical grouping for these VNRAs is possible per member state. So per responsible authority for national authorizations, and also if that authority, the same one, is an RMS, you can include the MRP-DCP products. There is no fee for these VNRAs for CAPs. I would like to note that as well. And the rationale here why we would like you to do that, and also perhaps soon, is the information is required, of course, for certain regulatory procedures, especially where the location of the QPPV or the PSMF is quite important for planning purposes. So it will definitely grease the wheel on those. Next slide, please. Then, I mean, we've already talked quite a bit about it yesterday, and it's Emily's favorite topic, I know. The VRAs on G118. Just a quick note, because this is a slide deck on actions you should pursue in the next year and years. So we didn't want to leave it out. So this is just a tiny little reminder that the QRD version 9 has to be applied by 2027. The guidance has been communicated by email. And our recommendation is to plan the coverage of your product portfolio quite carefully. And I would like to actually mention a positive example. There's one company, I won't name them, but I think they know who they are, who have already shared their plans for when they will submit G118s and for which products over the next few years with the NCAs and EMAs. So that's actually outstanding work, and well done you to that company. Next slide, please. Then a note on the UPD data quality, because it has come up as well in the discussions yesterday. So we have at the moment around 45,000 products in the UPD. To our understanding, we are at about 99.5 completeness rate, percent completeness rate. So there is really not a lot missing as far as we know. There's a small number of outstanding products per member state. There are some very few ones that are related to bugs issues that are being resolved. And we are still continuing to provide additional support to member states to reach completion where there are still these issues. So what we're doing next is to shift focus to data quality. And this is something we've also already heard about yesterday. So what we're going to do from our side is we are again applying data analytics to the UPD to identify where there might be quality issues. Of course, you can imagine if that's automated tools, there is a limit to what data analytics can actually work out in terms of what's wrong with UPD data. But where that is possible, we will create some dashboards in certain focus areas, for example, in strength, package information, product names, things like that. And then we will, on an ongoing basis, identify these quality issues to the relevant NCAs. So they will get the overviews of, so if there's an issue with a certain type of field, they can see, oh, that affects this many products. And if they click on it, they can see how they are, what these products are. And hopefully that facilitates cleansing and enriching that data. And we will obviously monitor the situation on an ongoing basis and provide support to the member states as needed. Next slide, please. So there's the Commission Implementing Regulation 2021-16, and I've not put the actual article there because I couldn't access it for some reason. But it is in the Commission Implementing Regulation that actually states, look, it is one of the responsibilities of the MAH to check the data quality. So I just want to reiterate that here as well. It is also your responsibility to make sure that your product data is correct in the UPD. And if it's not, the instruction in the article is to contact the NCA, and that the NCA will then fix that if they agree that it should be changed, I suppose. So in case you identify data quality issues with your products, do contact the NCA with specific requests for updates where you've identified those issues. So far, I think you will agree, we have applied some flexibility if submissions were not possible because a product was not available in the UPD. So we have given solutions for that and applied flexibility. And finally, in terms of tools for you to maybe check the data quality in a simpler way, we have a functionality coming up in Q2. That it will be possible for MAHs also to connect to the UPD via an API in read-only mode. So you won't be able to change anything in the UPD, but you can download the product information, for example, by connecting via an API tool, then you could retrieve a CSV file containing all the fields you're interested in, and you can compare, map, check, whatever you need to do with the UPD data. So that's only coming in Q2. It doesn't help you right now, but it's just a little preview that maybe that will help, and we would recommend that you consider doing that. Next slide, please. And it did actually come up yesterday as well about a flowchart, I think, on where to send questions, but we do have it here. Anyway, just as a reminder, for the UPD specifically, the user support is still active. So please, any technical questions, so this isn't working, I'm trying to log in, I click on this and it doesn't do that. Technical questions, please open a ticket via the service desk. For regulatory questions, we recommend that you use Ask EMA. I've put the link there. We are quite responsive on Ask EMA as well. I hope you will agree. Then, of course, contact the NCAs for questions or quality issues in relation to the product data in UPD, including EMA for the CAPs, of course. And then anything else you can still send to VetChange program. That is still active, but we would like to already warn you that we've noticed there's many messages still going through that mailbox, but many messages are merely being forwarded or redirected to the appropriate services. So we don't have that high volume in VetChange that we actually process ourselves, or the team processes themselves. So it's turning into a bit of a post office, let's say. So we have already decided that the mailbox will be disconnected later this year. Closure will, of course, be communicated, and the alternatives will be essentially what you see above: technical questions to the service desk and other questions via Ask EMA from then onwards. And I believe that's my last slide. Yes, so Noemi, back to you.
Thank you very much, Anna, for that very informative presentation. And as you said, probably has answered some of the questions raised yesterday. I have seen also that there are several questions in the chat, so we are going to collect them, and they will be answered during the questions and answer session after the first round of presentations. Thank you very much. We can move to the next presentation, which is a different topic on pharmacovigilance, signal management. And this is going to be provided by my colleague, Daniel Sondag. Daniel is a pharmacist. He worked in the Dutch Medicines Evaluation Board as a pharmacovigilance assessor. In 2018, he joined the agency in the human medicines division. And in 2020, he started as signal management lead in the pharmacovigilance department there. And at the end of the year, he moved to the veterinary medicine division as pharmacovigilance officer, where he has been responsible for the coordination of the implementation of the regulation with regards to pharmacovigilance, signal management, and post-authorization surveillance activities. And he's going to give us a presentation on an update on the signal management a year later, and just looking also at some what is coming for this year. So thank you very much, Daniel, and over to you.
Thank you, Noemi. Thanks for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. So I bring you today an update on the experience so far and the progress made with regards to pharmacovigilance and specifically signal management with the implementation of the new regulation. You can see here on the slide the outline of my presentation for today. I will start with some background on the pharmacovigilance principles under the new regulation. Then I will talk a little bit about the first year experience of signal management. Then, of course, how we see signal management for this year, some of the things that will probably change. And then I will finish with something a little bit different, an update on the description of adverse events in the product information. Next slide, please. So just to start, some background, we know that one of the main objectives of this new regulation is to simplify the regulatory environment and reduce the administrative burden for pharmaceutical companies developing veterinary medicines, for example, through streamlined pharmacovigilance rules. And we know that in pharmacovigilance, this is a big change that has been introduced with the new regulation, the transition from PSURs to signal management. So signal management becomes now the gold standard, the backbone of pharmacovigilance, and the main way to evaluate any potential changes to the benefit-risk balance of veterinary medicinal products. Not forgetting that, of course, this is reinforcing the scientific focus of the safety monitoring activities and while promoting and protecting animal health, public health, and protection of environment. Next slide, please. So we have here on the slide the four main pharmacovigilance pillars of the regulation. First, the adverse event reports collection and recording, and you're very familiar. So there's the requirement to report the adverse events in the Union Pharmacovigilance database within 30 days, and that includes also the non-serious cases within the EU and outside of the EU. There's a requirement to provide the annual sales data and the estimation of the numbers of animals treated per target species. Then there is the continuous adverse event analysis by the companies. So then we go to signal management. One of the points that is specified in the regulation, and actually also in more detail in the implementing act, is that companies can use EudraVigilance veterinary database or their own database, in which case the requirement is to still perform 1 yearly signal detection analysis on EVVet. Then there is the requirement to submit what we call annual statements by the MAHs, and by this we mean the confirmation on the benefit-risk balance and the confirmation that the signal management process has been performed. And of course, the signal management results and outcomes should be submitted to the database. Very importantly, if the outcome of the signal management process identifies a change to the benefit risk or a new risk, the regulation says that MAHs should submit a variation, and I will come into more a little bit later in some slides with some more details on this. Then we have the regulator's oversight through pharmacovigilance inspections, the evaluation of the results and outcomes of the signal management process, and the targeted signal management. And I will also come back with more details in a few slides about this. And of course, we cannot forget the pharmacovigilance master file and the quality management system. Next slide, please. So just to give a visual representation of how the EudraVigilance database looks like, we see a big increase in the number of cases received in 2022. Of course, we know that starting from 2022, non-serious cases are also submitted to EVVet, and well, also taking into account that this big increase in data in 2022 also includes a backlog submission of around 30,000 cases from one single company. But just to give a quick visual representation of how the cases look like right now in EudraVigilance. Next slide. So one of the initiatives that started with a new regulation is the establishment of what we have called the PISMEC. This is the Pilot Signal Management Expert Group. So it has been established as a work-sharing operational expert subgroup from the pharmacovigilance working party. And it has been established for a period of 2 years. There are 12 members, both from NCAs and 1 member from EMA. And their tasks is related to signal management, both for CAPs and non-CAPs. And the main objectives of this pilot is to test new processes, including the risk-based approach, and I will explain this also in a few more slides. Also to build a sustainable regulatory framework that will support the provisions of the new regulation and, of course, good pharmacovigilance while managing the administrative burden. So it is a pilot, and we have agreed to perform, of course, a pilot evaluation that can be expected for the end of the year, beginning of next year. And the idea is that we will perform a critical review of the procedures, the activities, the resource efficiency, and ultimately we will give recommendations for the long-term viability of the system and come up with proposals for improvement of the approaches used. Next slide, please. So to give you the original setup, how things have been working last year, how the signals have been evaluated. So those signals that have been submitted by MAHs where there were proposed regulatory actions. This is the process of how we've been so far working with the signals. So the company has been recording the signals in the Union Pharmacovigilance database. One of these experts from this pilot has been picking up the signal. We've been discussing the signals on our weekly meetings, and eventually the signal will go to the Pharmacovigilance Working Party, where a recommendation is given, and subsequently the signal was discussed further at the CVMP, CMDV level, and eventually it was we came back to the companies requesting for the submission of a VNRA, for example, with a request to update the product information. Next slide, please. So what will change this year? So just to tell you a little bit how things are evolving, we have a proposal for a change of how this process will change. So the signals where the company identifies a change to the benefit risk or a new risk, and therefore they come with proposed regulatory actions from the companies. They have to be recorded in IRIS by the MAH, and in parallel, the MAH will submit a VRA. This is what the regulation says. It is specified in Article 81(2). So just to be in line with what regulation says, we see that the MAH will submit a VRA. This VRA will be assessed by the CVMP with regards to CAPS, by the relevant member state for MRP, DCP, and SRP procedures, or the relevant member state for pure NAPs, nationally authorized products, with no direct involvement from the Pharmacovigilance Working Party in principle, unless their advice is specifically requested. So we leave the door open that the CVMP, relevant member state, they can request advice from the Pharmacovigilance Working Party if, for example, a specific signal is relevant for similar products with the same active substance and further analysis are necessary. Or, for example, a signal is relevant for other products and further analysis are necessary. Next slide, please. So this is how the process seems now with this updated proposal. So I need to clarify that this is how the progress is going. This hasn't been formally agreed with the committees yet, but just to show you how the progress is going, and this is the current proposal of how the process will change. So the signal with regulatory proposed actions by the company, they will be recorded in the database. The companies will have to submit a VRA, and this VRA, CFC, like just plain, will be assessed by CVMP, relevant member state, reference member state. If necessary, input and advice will be given by the Pharmacovigilance Working Party with the support of the PSMEC, and eventually the adopted recommendation will go back to the company. Next slide, please. Then I also mentioned that the targeted signal management, so this is one option that it's also described in the regulation. And as we are working on this process, we propose to perform this targeted signal management using a risk-based approach. So it will be performed as a work sharing by this expert group during 2023. The idea is that it will focus on new active substances, those that have been on the market for less than 5 years. Other criteria may exceptionally apply. For example, if the product is authorized in new target species, if there are new combinations, if there's a new indication. This all would have to be endorsed by the Pharmacovigilance Working Party, by the CVMP and CMDV. And it would also prioritize potential signals concerning medically important weather terms. The analysis will be performed at least once a year by a designated lead authority represented by the relevant PISMEC member. And this is also in line with regulation. And then we're also developing what we call the data-driven approach. And the idea is that we will test the effectiveness of this risk-based approach by evaluating the data submitted in 2022 and 2023 in EVVET, and we will also use some prioritization criteria. Next slide, please. Perhaps it's a little bit too small, but so this is a summary flowchart of what I was just explaining. So signal management under the new regulation for NCAs and EMA. We have on the left-hand side these admissions from the MAHs in IRIS. On the one hand, we have this annual conclusion on the benefit risk and the confirmation on the signal management process. Sometimes those might come with additional information submitted, as it was described in the guidelines. So they might require further review. Most of them won't, and they would have no immediate action required. Then we go to signals with proposed regulatory actions by the MAH. And as I was saying, the companies will have to submit VRA. It will be assessed by the relevant committees. And if necessary, the Pharmacovigilance Working Party can also provide advice. And then we also have refuted signals and signals proposed for close monitoring. Those have to be recorded in the database, and they will have to be submitted by the MAHs. And then I want to go to the right-hand side of the flowchart, and that's what I was just explaining about the targeted signal management and the two methods that we're also developing. The data-driven approach, once a year, focusing on the evaluation of adverse events reports in 2022 and 2023, and the risk-based approach, focusing on new active substances that have been on the market less than 5 years. And the idea is that any new relevant signals can be detected from the regulatory network. And here on the regulatory that will follow, there's still some ongoing discussions if there will be a request for a VRA, a VNRA, or what we also call the Article 58 request. So it's not decided yet. As I say here, there are some ongoing discussions, and we will come back to this when it's all clear. Next slide, please. So just to give you also some visual representation of how the signals have looked like in the last year. We received a total of 206 signals submitted by the MAHs in IRIS, 25 of them with proposed regulatory actions. So I also have to note here with the caveat that these numbers will not reflect probably anything. Like we cannot compare these numbers to the number of signals that we will receive in 2023, actually because of how the process has been running, and also that many of the signals were actually requested by the companies because in the transition into the new regulation, we also requested some companies to submit some signals related to some adverse events that were under monitoring by the regulators. So we, you're probably all aware, but we requested some companies to perform an updated assessment of these adverse events and, if necessary, submit the signals. So there was also some part of requests from our side. So maybe just to show how it looks like, but probably we should take these numbers with some caution and not take some conclusions. Next slide. I think you can click twice. Yes, just to show that some signals that came initially with proposed regulatory, with no proposed regulatory actions from the companies, so refuted and close monitoring, actually, after further review by the regulators, there was a final request for a PI update. So it's just not those signals that come with regulatory actions proposed by the MAH, but those that are initially refuted and for close monitoring, some of them, they also end up with actions. Next slide, please. Here also just to show you the medically important veterinary terms list. This was published on the VGVP on the module on signal management, so you're probably aware of this list. Just to show you the list of medically important terms that have been defined and are being used for prioritization during signal management. Next slide, please. Some words about the potential impact on administrative burden. So, as I've been explaining, from the monitoring by the regulatory authorities, the focus will be on new active substances. There will be also a check on any other new relevant information received from 2022, 2023. The idea is that it will be a streamlined process with well-defined roles and responsibilities, avoiding unnecessary regulatory burden, and it will be performed as a full work share through the PSMEC, aiming to avoid any duplication. Next slide, please. Some ongoing actions to manage this administrative burden with regards to the requirement of annual statements for all VMPs, including homeopathics. This was defined in the regulation and more specifically in the implementing regulation. There is a requirement to perform one yearly signal detection analysis using the data recorded in the Uniform Pharmacovigilance database. And for this, we have developed the annual statement submission, and we've made this process as simple as possible as a checkbox exercise in IRIS. For products with no adverse event report or few of them, this will be not a high burden exercise. And we have also developed the recommended due dates for submission. A draft was shared for consultation with industry before publication. Next slide, please. Then, with regards to the signal submissions improvements, these are ongoing. The product groupings will be game-changing, and this is foreseen by mid of this year. The recoding is ongoing. Also, for major MAHs that use their own database, have to download data from eVet to align. The download facility has been improved recently. Also, with regards to the data warehouse and signal submission tools, this is also ongoing. There are improved user tools under development, including better integration of systems, and there are continuous trainings being organized and additional tools being developed. Next slide, please. So, just to give you some of the objectives or milestones that we have for this year, we're now busy with regulatory network trainings for signal management expert during this month. The signal management process update, we are planning to finalize this for the second half of the year. As I mentioned, the PSMEC evaluation report with recommendations for the future, we will work on this by the end of the year, and we will ask for the company's feedback via a survey on the 2 years experience. So, of course, we will ask for your input and we will try to incorporate as much feedback from you on this. So you can expect this. Also, we're working on enhanced collaboration with the pharmacovigilance inspectors. Some training with inspectors will be planned. The dates still to be confirmed. And of course, system upgrades and improvements, which are ongoing throughout the year and probably also next year. Next slide, please. Okay, so just to finalize, I'm going to give you also an update on something a little bit different. I think you're also aware of this, but there has been some updates on the description of adverse events in the product information following the QRD version 9. So I just wanted to point in some slides some updated information. And just as background, there was the QRD template version 9 revised in 2022. Also, the Q&A describing adverse events in product information has been updated, and the experience with variations has been taken into account, and the CVMP agreed with the change in approach. Next slide. So the idea is that the guidance will have to be applied pragmatically. New scientific text should not be introduced. MAHs and the competent authorities should not reassess data from MAA dossiers. And the adverse events referred to in general terms should be presented as follows. So you have an example of how change will be reflected, just as an example of how it looks like with the new QRD version 9. Next slide, please. Also some points on this. Additional information in footnote under the adverse event table is accepted. As long as it's information for supporting the adverse event management or improving the understanding of the VMP use. Also, current existing imprecise qualifiers are now accepted as footnotes, such as transient, temporary, self-limiting, spontaneous resolution. Then terminology describing the adverse events in the SPC may differ from the package leaflet. This, of course, follows what it's specified in the regulation, that the package leaflet should be written in a language that is understandable for the general public. And then standard phrase cross-referencing section 3.6 in the PL. And I think this was a correction. There was not, there was a mistake before, so now this has been corrected as well. Next slide, please. So some actions. So the change in approach has been communicated to all MAHs and industry associations, and the Q&A document describing these adverse events in the PI will be updated and published on the EMA website. It hasn't been published yet. I think it has to be formally agreed by CVMP, and this will happen next month. So it hasn't been published yet, but it will be published soon. And that was my last slide. Thank you very much. We will have later some questions, I think.
Yes, thank you, Daniel. We will have some questions, and indeed we have already some questions in the chat box. So be ready for that. Thank you very much for the presentation. I think it was again very, very thorough, and informative, and at the end, very practical, real life information about the update of the QRD. And I think that now we will go directly to the other perspective on the implementation on this topic. So we will go for the industry perspective, and just to say that there has been a change in the program. Now the presenter is going to be Tony Simon, and I'm going to introduce Tony. Tony is the Director, European Scientific Affairs and Pharmacovigilance in Zoetis. He has spent over 30 years in what it was Pfizer Animal Health and now Zoetis in a wide range of different roles. And now he's joint head of Zoetis Global Pharmacovigilance and member of the Animal Health Europe and Health for Animals Pharmacovigilance Working Groups, the FEDRA Committee, and also the VICH Pharmacovigilance Expert Working Group. So I hope he can hear me well and we can hear him well. Tony, if you are ready, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Naomi. And as you said, these slides were due to be presented by our colleague Magali, who's head of global EU pharmacovigilance at Boehringer, but unfortunately she's sick at the moment and unable to present them. So I will do my best to present her slides, and any mistakes and errors will be entirely mine. Next slide, please. So we're going to cover some of the same ground that the other speakers have done, which is always the downside of being the last speaker in a series of topics. We're going to look at the achievements in 2022 because there have been substantial achievements and we need to recognize and celebrate those. The UPD, and I've been keeping an eye on the chat as well, and I'm well aware as a product owner at the UPD what's been going on there. EVVET and case processing, which Daniel's just talked a bit about, and also industry priorities for 2023. Next slide, please. So 2022, and I think we're going to start with thanks, and we're extremely grateful for numerous webinars organized by the EMA, and also in particular the reactivated meetings in the JIG format. And we see this in particular as critical as we align, well, we continue the process of alignment with the new regulations and also the expectations. And as Daniel's already talked about, we do see this as being a bit of a moving target as the new regulation settles down over the next few years and as it gets optimized and tweaked a bit. We've all developed and performed new processes, sometimes more successfully, sometimes with a bit more frustration, but we have achieved it. Submission of annual statements and signal reports. And we've also all gained experience with new tools, the EVVET data warehouse, ARIS, and we all of us individually have done an awful lot of work of adapting our internal systems to the new format and requirements. VICHL7 is one example, but rewriting SOPs, other documents, creation of PSMFs, and everything else. However, next slide, please. We want to recognize that we are still really in the early days of this regulation. I mean, it may be in place if we look at the last regulation for maybe 10 or 15 years. And from the pharmacovigilance area and the systems area, this was a huge change. And it is early days, but we shouldn't lose sight of some of the overall objectives of the regulation. And we are looking forward to the time when there is a reduction in the administrative burden. At this time, we see an increased burden, but hopefully that's just the teething problems, and that we will achieve this aim of the regulation in due course. Next slide, please. The UPD, from a pharmacovigilance point of view, we see absolutely critical. And again, we're talking about UPD as pharmacovigilance because within many MAHs, it's the pharmacovigilance groups in the regulatory space who've done most with sales data and things like that in the past because of pharmacovigilance, PSURs and things. So not unsurprisingly, we often get that opportunity to develop the sales data for the UPD within our companies as well. And I'm not going to go through this because I think we probably all recognize that, the interconnectivity and the criticality of the UPD. And we also know that everybody, the EMA team, the NCAs and MAHs are all working extremely hard to reach success with the UPD. But I also think we probably all underestimated the complexity and workload associated with it. But the goal of the interconnectivity of systems is entirely right, and it will be achieved. I think the only question is when, and we can come back to this in the Q&A. And I think that where Jana mentioned that 99% of the products are probably there, that may well be roughly right on a global basis. But I think many of our experiences is that at the package level, which is critical for sales data, it's significantly less than 99% are actually either present or accurate. in the UPD, but I'm certain we'll come back to that in the Q&A. Next slide, please. And again, these slides were made some time ago, so we know that there's continuous progress with new products becoming available in the UPD. But where products are not in the UPD, it makes it difficult. We're seeing things not recoded appropriately in EVVet. Sometimes we're not able to retrieve such cases for signal detection activities, nor able to import them into our own systems. We also have struggled at times this year where we've been trying to do annual statements and simply have not been able to identify all the products we think should be in RS being present in RS at the right time for the due date. But hopefully both the increased completeness of the UPD for products, and we'll talk about product grouping in a minute, that should be greatly improved, at least later on in 2023. With regards to the agency expectations following a signal submission, I thank Daniel for the clarity he's given, but our experience over 2022 was really unclear. I think with the CAPs, there was quite a lot of feedback, a reasonable amount of feedback to MAHs on the signals which they submitted, but relatively little feedback on certainly close monitoring or any other activities relating to MRP, DCPs and NAPs. And for us, that's a bit of a challenge because at the moment, it really is a bit of a black box. We're sending stuff in, but we're not quite sure how it's viewed, whether we're doing the right thing. Does no news mean good news, or does no news mean somebody's not really looked at it? The other thing we'd like to make is that we know, and we've seen this with PSURs as well, a timeline of 2 weeks to respond to agency questions is really not practical. We can keep requesting extensions every time, but we do believe, excuse me, that a 4 weeks would be a more realistic standard, unless we're dealing with an emerging safety issue or we're dealing with a critical issue with another signal. But I think a 4-week expectation of a response is probably more realistic from our perspective, because some of the work we're having to do is very detailed and may involve other parts of the organization in terms of trying to identify other sources of information to support the depth of analysis we're trying to do. Next slide, please. Jan has already talked about the UPD challenges, and this is requiring a lot of work within our companies. I think all companies have committed a lot of time to this already. And we do see this as absolutely critical, because realistically, I mean, Magali's written here, development of manual process for submission requires significant resources. But for large MAHs, our estimate for ourselves is it may be 13,000 lines a month of sales data. There is no way we can achieve that in a manual manner. We're building an automated, validated system, and that absolutely depends on 100% accuracy at the UPD end, because otherwise we end up sending a figure of 5, but it may be interpreted incorrectly when that figure of 5 units is consumed by the UPD. And the manual workaround to correct those sort of things, unless it's the occasional exception, doesn't bear thinking about. So I think there is no, for large MAHs, there is no manual option. We actually have to have the systems working correctly as soon as we switch them on. And the critical thing there, again, is going to be data accuracy and completeness of the UPD. We've heard, I mean, the industry position is, we heard from Jana, and we understand that there was an extension made to June 2023. I think that deadline of June 2023 really depends on when the UPD is going to be pretty nearly 100% correct for all MAHs. And again, I've seen some of the comments in the chat. That does depend on bugs, and I know the bugs are getting resolved for MRP DCPs, which have been blocking things in the UPD until recently. Those are getting resolved, but it also requires NCA responsiveness. And I can give an example of an NCA where we know there's a lot of work which needs to be done. We wrote to them 11 weeks ago and have not had any response at all or seen any change in the UPD. Now, unless there's significant progress in the next 5 or 6 weeks, that NCA will put the date of June 2023 under some risk. And we just have to, there's not much I think that MAH can do about that. The suggestion here was 6 to 9 months after the UPD is completed and clean for industry to complete the mapping exercise. That's our suggestion. We're already within the 6-month period from June 2023. But this is it is a line by line. There is no automated way of doing this. It is very, very detailed and requires a lot of checking. So I don't want to underplay the challenge that MAH is. We understand the challenge for the NCAs as well and the EMA team, but this is a major challenge for MAHs. Next slide, please. Submission of follow-ups. The proposed process we've heard for jigs in terms of needing to exchange information with other MAHs to actually update another MAH's case, it is really not proving practical under realistic conditions, not least that we may not even have any contact with a particular MAH. We may not know their QPPV. We simply do not know who to contact at that MAH. It's also extremely time consuming, and there are inevitable differences of opinion between MAHs which take a lot of time to resolve. It also is a challenge in terms of many of us with a large number of cases are either batch reporting via the gateway or running fully automatic reporting. So managing individual cases in that sort of situation is very difficult to do. It really, for many of us, it's an all or nothing approach. The data quality, we support the direction of travel in terms of data quality is critical for all of us. It's critical for the network, it's critical for NCAs, it's critical for MAHs, and it's also critical for our patients. And that's why we do this. This is why we're involved in pharmacovigilance. We believe strongly in what we're doing. But we do have to, the only thing I think we'd say here is we do have to take our approach in Europe to data quality in a coordinated manner with other agencies, with all the NCAs across Europe, but also outside Europe. Because we, as MAHs, we work in a truly global environment. And the real concern we have is doing one thing for one NCA and another agency asks us to do something completely different in another country. And we cannot manage contradictory approaches. So we would really encourage that this is looked at on a global basis. Because again, if we address it on a global basis, we have the ability to meet Europe's expectations in terms of countries submitted from third countries, cases submitted from third countries. Without approaching it on a global basis, most MAHs, I think, would take the approach that what non-European country asks for, we give, and that's the format the case is, even if it's submitted to Europe. Duplicates are a significant issue for us. And again, this talks to the need for a global approach, because we're seeing contradictory expectations from agencies in and outside the EU on which case should be kept or nullified, which makes management of our databases very difficult. Duplicate detection for us is really challenging. I think that for us, we see this as a major priority. We're well aware of the challenges in the human database from talking to human QPPVs with duplicates, and we feel that this is the time to get this right for the EV-Vet, so we avoid 4 or 5 years down the line being swamped with duplicates as well. The challenge we've got is due to the access policy. We can no longer rely on first letters of the names and the first 2 characters of the postcode. We no longer see that. And without a change to that access policy to give us back that limited information back, we will continue to really struggle with duplicate management. We do believe that EMA has access to has access to that data. And we really hope that the introduction of the master data concept, the implementation of the master data concept by the EMA and the identification of duplicates will be the way forward to try and keep EV-Vet as clean as possible. Next slide, please. So our priorities, and this is my final slide, our priorities for 2023 is, first of all, the UPD needs to be complete and clean. And then we can move on to submission of sales and availability data. We thank, and again, these slides were written some time ago. We very much appreciate the opportunity to comment on the annual statements, the proposed annual statements for 2023, and also the responsiveness of the EMA in terms of being able to taking our concerns into consideration in a very short timeline. So we very much appreciate that. And we would like to see any future changes to be communicated with a reasonable timeline. Many of us may be planning our annual statements and our work around this 3 or 4 months in advance. So a significant time period is important. We also would appreciate proactive and timely communication of known technical issues, proposed timelines to the business use of the respective tools, and user-friendly release notes. It's very challenging for us when something happens, when we come in on a Monday and something's changed in EV-Vet, and we don't know whether it's broken. We don't know whether this is new. We don't know how to, if it is new, we don't know how to use it. So I think what we're really looking for there is a stronger alignment, because I think the POs or the Agile teams have become disaligned slightly with the changes which are happening in EV-Vet, the industry representatives. So a stronger alignment with those in terms of what's coming. And also communication, proactive communication, preferably before the release comes out, because we need to actually introduce changing. We need to introduce training. We may need to update our internal procedures for these simple, for you, they may be simple releases. For us, they're fairly major. And any major changes, there should be the opportunity of a short webinar to explain it. It can be very difficult reading release notes or even documentation to understand what we're really supposed to be doing. And again, reduce the administrative burden, further develop technical solutions, the product groupings in the UPD, data warehouse and ARIS. And again, I think this is collaboration. This was an idea which came up from the MAHs, and we very much appreciate the EMA's support, the pharmacovigilance group's support, and commitment to introduce that, because we believe this will help MAHs, but it will also help the regulatory data network. And again, case follow-up in EV-Vet, we've mentioned the master data concept, and we've mentioned the identification of duplicate cases. And I think the next slide is my final slide. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, so 2023, it'll be another year of transition. I think it'll be a year of embedding. There will be transitions as processes and systems get tweaked and improved. But I think it is going to be a year of embedding. I think it's going to be, it'll have its challenges, but I hope that by this time next year, we'll be saying, actually, we're on much firmer ground now, and we can move into away from storming and forming, and more into the norming and performing, if you think of the team model. But yeah, 2022 was, I think, challenging for all of us. And my final slide is to say thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tony, and thank you again for stepping in to present today. So we are a bit late with time, but we still have some time for questions. So we'll go directly there, and we'll start from the very beginning, which is a very good place to start. And in fact, we are going to start with a question that was raised yesterday afternoon, and we didn't have the time to address because we ran out of time, and it's from Klaus Hellman. The question has two different parts as we see it. The second part refers more to innovation, so we're going to leave that one for the session after the coffee break because it's focused on innovation. And the Commission has, representative has very graciously accepted to address the first part of the question, which is, while the regulation had the objective to harmonize the market and requirements, we see increasing activities by EU member states to implement national legislation, which goes beyond the regulation and appear to scrutinize other objectives. Please, Alfonso, can you provide a response? Thank you.
Thank you, Noemi, for the question, and good morning to everybody. Well, without knowing the details, it's very difficult for us to take any position on that. But what is clear is now having a VMP regulation which is directly applicable in all member states, there is little room, and I think that the VMP regulation sets the provisions where member states may develop additional elements to complement the VMP regulation. So that's what I like to say, and without knowing all the details, I think it's better to not take any other position. And just also for your information, there are also mechanisms when member states notify and develop new technical legislation. Those technical legislation have to be notified to the European Commission. So there are also mechanisms in order to, let's say, check compliance with EU legislation. But without knowing the details, better not to go into further elements. Thank you.
Thank you. There's some questions referring to the presentation on sales and UPD and pharmacovigilance, so we will have to try a balance of both. I'll start with the first one from Randy that says some NCS has still not added our product in UPD, even though we have reminded it several times. What to do? Janet, would you be able to address that, please?
Just briefly. The same advice as before applies. I mean, you have to try and get through to the relevant NCA. I suppose so. We have in the past sometimes tried to provide assistance with that, but sometimes we meet with a similar response. So we do have, or CMDV has actually published a list of procedural contact points. So I hope that you're using this when a product is missing, or if you identify quality issues, that you check that CMDV list of procedural contact points, because there is usually somebody assigned or a specific email for questions on UPD product data, and you can hopefully contact there and receive a response. So we copy, if you haven't done so already, we can copy that link into the chat as well for anybody who's interested. Thank you.
Thank you. One more on UPD, please. QPPV, this is from Isabel. QPPV and PSMF information in the UPD. If the VNRA was submitted last December, for instance, as a grouping, and one of them is approved and the other one is still pending, what can the applicant do?
Thank you very much for that question as well. Yes, since December, there had been an issue or two with the approval of those VNRAs. So some of them, some specific submissions are affected, cannot be approved yet due to some issues with the system. For non-CUPs, that will be resolved on Monday. and then they can be all approved. So this coming Monday, and for CAPs, hopefully within the next few weeks as well. So, I mean, to a certain extent, you can submit. So the fact that they cannot be approved right now doesn't affect your ability to submit. At least I can say that much. And then once it's possible to do those approvals, then they can basically be approved all the way. But I don't think there's an issue, because there's not a legal obligation, of course, to approve those in a certain period of time, and to a large extent, as I explained in my presentation, it's in the interest also of the NCAs and also EMA to approve those as soon as possible once it's actually possible. So thank you for the question.
Thank you very much, Jana. And there is another one for you, sorry. Some NCAs have their own availability status systems. If the information is not available in UPD, the MHS have to do double work. Is there any deadline for NCAs to update the data regarding availability in UPD in order to avoid the upload the data into different systems?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question as well. While we were listening to the other presentations, I actually looked into the Commission Implementing Regulation 2021-16 to see if there are any deadlines at all. There are no deadlines for NCAs to update the data in the UPD. I'm just going to say that straight out. In terms of MAHs updating that information, I said in my slides as well, there's no specific deadline, but going forward, let's say for the maintenance of that information, it states that MAHs should update it as soon as they become aware of a change. So that's maybe a little bit, not a specific deadline as well. So I do understand the raising of the double work, and that might be an issue. But again, I think, like for some other things we've mentioned, this is a national issue, I suppose, and we would encourage you to discuss openly with the NCA about the need to submit into a national system the exact same information that is being submitted into the UPD. That is, of course, overall not the objective here, and perhaps then you can come to an agreement with a specific member state. Thank you.
Thank you, Jana. There's one that will interest quite a few people, and it refers to the EPARs. As a result of the UPD, we understood that EPARs will be not published in the EMA's website in the future. If this is well understood, where the EPARs will be available when UPD will be fully implemented?
So thank you for me again. So the for CAPS, the public CVMP assessment reports are currently being uploaded on the UPD. It's literally happening right now. Some are already available, and pretty soon all the historic and the new public assessment reports will be available in the UPD, and then also on the public portal. And again, because our theme is to not duplicate work, so if we were to publish in parallel in the future also on the EMA corporate website, the risk that raises is that there is like a 1 or 2 day difference between a document appearing on the public portal and a document appearing on the corporate website. So obviously we want to avoid that. And that's why the publication on the corporate website was discontinued already. We were lagging ever so slightly behind with updating the information in the UPD and publishing it on the public portal, but we are almost there. So watch the space. And whenever we get questions about this, within the division as well, we are usually advising people to go to the public portal instead of the corporate website already.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'm going to change the topic now. I'm coming on pharmacovigilance. I think there are two questions that I think refer to the same topic, which is the need of a BRA in relation to signal detection. One is from Sonia Schwab, and it says submitting signals with change to benefit risk and simultaneous submission of a VRA. It says, as I understood it so far, a submitting signal including proposed actions are reviewed by responsible working parties. if the VRA is submitted at the same time and the two submissions are processed independently, what happens if after evaluation of the signal in iris has been completed and expert groups recommend different actions? Does the MHS have to submit a new VRA if the initial VRA has already been completed? I don't know if everybody's lost. Sorry, I'm sure, Daniel, you can explain what it means. That I don't know if you want also first to address the comment from, let me find it, the crew, sorry to destroy your name, that I think is a comment stroke question about, again, less administrative burden with VRAs for any signal, and it's a question I think you may want to address that first because it's quite an important point.
Yes, thank you. And yeah, let me clarify because maybe I didn't explain it very well in the slides, and I see there's some confusion. So just to clarify what the regulation says, so that on the one hand, companies, they have to record in the Union Pharmacovigilance database, they have to record all the results and outcomes of the signal management process. Then for signals where there is a change to the benefit risk or there is a new risk identified, then they have to submit a VRA. It doesn't specify VNRAs, it actually says that they have to submit a VRA. So it doesn't mean that for every signal there will be a VRA submitted. It will be only in those cases where there is a change to the benefit risk identified or a new risk, and therefore there is a potential update to the SPC necessary. So in those cases, a VRA has to be submitted. But maybe we can separate the recording in the database with the submission of the VRA. I think we're still working on the process of how exactly that will work because, of course, we want to avoid any increase in the administrative burden, and maybe we can simplify the process. But I think we cannot go different from what the regulation requires, which is actually that in those cases a VRA has to be submitted. And just to clarify, then those variations will not be assessed in principle by the expert group, by the PSMEC, or by the Pharmacovigilance Working Party. It will go through. It will be assessed by the relevant competent authority, the CVMP, just following the usual route of VRAs. So I don't know if that clarifies already the question.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm going to see if there are any questions here in the room. Yes, there is one from Frederick Klein. Please, Frederick.
I have a question for Tony Simon. You pointed out that concern about data quality of adverse event reports and discrepancy between EU and non-EU competent authorities. Would it be possible to have some concrete example, please?
Thank you for that question. I think this is a topic which is something which we're going to be working on at industry, and we're going to be bringing back to VICH as well. There's in the next round of VICH conversations, there's going to be a discussion both about Guideline 24 and Guideline 29. So at the moment we are in a data capture type mode from that point of view. But it does mean it's around, there are some, the current guideline for Guideline 24 is very high level, and I think we generally would all support fairly high level guidance documents, but we do believe there may be a need to tighten up some of the specificities there in terms of how cases should be captured, what sort of data needs to go into them, and it comes down to things like which products should be added, because if we add every product which is animals ever received, we're actually going to confound signal detection and make Daniel's life much worse from that point of view. So there is we need to think more clearly now about what's the end game, what's the desired outcome, and therefore how do we set it up for success. That's one example, but there are some other examples which we will come back on as well. But again, I do appreciate, particularly if we're thinking about vaccines, and we're aware of the challenge with some vaccines in some states at the moment. Previous product administration probably is quite important there, but in many cases, we're just going to be creating white noise in the signal detection system. So I think there's some more thought which needs to go into that area. I hope I haven't really answered your question, but I hope I've given you a feeling of the sort of things we're thinking about.
Thank you. I don't see Frederick following up, so I guess he's happy with the response. There's no hands raised, are they? No. Okay, so we'll continue with the questions in the chat, and there is one, Daniel, about training. I don't know if you can respond. Continuous training is a key point in order to improve signal management quality by the MHS. Will you organize training this year?
Yes, so we haven't confirmed yet another training, but I think we will do it. I think this has been it's been very much appreciated, as I hear from the companies, and I think we could commit to organize another webinar on this topic this year. We haven't confirmed any dates, but it's in the planning. It's under the discussion. So. Thank you for this question. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm sure that's good news, and I see thumbs up. So excellent. One more for you, please, from Caroline Boda. Sometimes the former wording in the adverse events section does not use VETRA terms for all adverse events. Some of them are clinical description. How should be managed? Shall we, in this specific situation, change the wording a little bit to code the description into VETRA terms?
Yeah, I think this is a very specific case, but it might happen indeed. And I think the recommendation has been that try to find the most similar term that would actually sort of cover that description. But if you consider that there's no existing term that does describe the event, there's also the option to propose a new VETRA term that would cover that event. I think that's so far the recommendation. Maybe it's difficult to say now, but on a case by case, those have been the options raised.
Thank you. Following that topic, is an update from Alessio Gianelli. Sorry, is an update of the list of medical important terms for a SIM?
Yes. Also, so the list will be revised and updated in the future, so it's not a fixed and final list. It's just the first list that was agreed and published, but I think that it is clear that the list will be revised and probably more terms will be added to this list. But I cannot give you a date yet, but yes, will probably be updated.
Thank you, Daniel. And one more for you, because you're doing so well. From Mark Novonti. Would EMA consider bringing forward the April 2021 wording in a draft version of the BGPP guideline, which is about signal management processes and terminology, blah, 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 into a future version of the guideline? You know which one they're talking about?
Yes. I mean, to be honest, I was thinking about this question, and so there is certain terminology used and how the process is described in the regulation, and I think we cannot go further than what the regulation specifies. What is there? So the regulation has to be followed in what it's described there. I don't know if we have the plan to actually change this wording in the guideline.
Noemi, if you want, I can.
Sure.
Yeah.
Please, Josh.
Yes, thank you. So my name is Jos Solarts. Good morning, all. I'm responsible for the pharmacovigilance team here. So on this topic, I think we made it clear also, we're very welcoming actually any alternative approach that the industry has in doing signal management. We acknowledge that for regulators are at the same level still as many of our colleagues working in the industry. So we're happy to learn. So practically, I think this hopefully is already occurring. Whether we explicitly will bring it in the next update of the guideline, yes, it's a good proposal. I think we will consider it to make it perhaps explicit. But I think in practice, it's already taking care. Nomi, if you're okay, I'll take one of the questions from the presentation earlier, and thank you for bringing up the word embedded. Next, I'll be using that as well. That's a nice word, I think, for next year. And you also, Tony, you said it's not clear with a lot of signals that have been submitted what is happening. And let me also start with the good news. Yes, no news is good news in these cases. And you know that many of the signals, definitely in the beginning, when you start analyzing for the first time, which is still the case, I think, for many of the products, the full life cycle data under signal management, you discover a lot of signals, and many of the signals have nothing to do with the product, so they're false positives, which is good news for the animals, which is good news for you as a company, because it has nothing to do at the end with your product, but it's not so good news because you have created this work, and the legislation still requires you then to submit this type of information. And of course, you're wondering, if I'm submitting this, why is nobody responding on it? So it's not that we're not looking at it. So we also take a risk-based approach from the regulatory point of view. But indeed, no news is good news. We don't want to create any additional burden to look at everything where you already have concluded that it's very unlikely that your product is involved. We look at those data from a risk-based approach, and sometimes, we have a different opinion, and then we will come back to you. So I hope this is some good news, Tony.
He's nodding, so that's good. Thank you very much, Josh. There is a question, there's a hand raised in the audience. Before going to that one, I would like to address one of the questions that is in a different topic, but very, I guess, how to say, important at the moment, which is from Frédéric Descamps, and is about the EMA survey ongoing on avian influenza vaccines. And he's asking that, based on previous experience, if there is some expected additional guidance for potential upcoming EMA applications with the intention to facilitate the availability of authorized vaccines in good time. Can we expect some pragmatism from the EMA CVMP Commission on these applications? Any general comments? And he's coming from the view that most of the previous centralized EMAs have been withdrawn over time, probably due to requirements to complete the dossier over time and the lack of revenues. And this is very unfortunate, as some of these products may be of some help in the near future. And I think Ivo Claesen should be able to provide a response on this. Please, Ivo, thank you.
No, thank you very much, Noemi. And Frederick, thank you for raising this question, because it allows me to advertise that the survey is currently ongoing. And I would like to give a bit of background to the survey and then respond to your question. So the survey is ongoing because the Commission has asked EFSA to work on an advice on potential strategies to be used to control the outbreaks of avian influenza in the Union. and I'm sure you are aware that avian influenza, which in the past was very much a seasonal disease, that we're suffering huge outbreaks currently in the Union with huge economic damage, but also with recent indications that a spillover from the outbreaks in poultry could go into mammals. We've seen outbreaks in mink farms with mink-to-mink transmission in Spain. There's some spillover into the human population, and just this week I read an article on spillover, not in Europe, but in Peru, into seals, and indicative also for seal-to-seal transmission, so mammal-to-mammal transmission. So you can see that there is an interest now in looking at, okay, how are we going to control those outbreaks? Europe has always had a non-vaccination policy against avian influenza. So in addition to the things that you mentioned, Frederick, in your question, I think that also not being able to market those vaccines has not been good for keeping these vaccines on the market. We did approve a number of vaccines under exceptional circumstances and with indeed proper guidance back in, it must have been 2004, 2005, 2006. I was personally involved as a CVMP member at the time. And and we had set the reduced requirements, data requirements for those vaccines, which were limited to more or less the classical inactivated vaccines that we were familiar with and that we knew how they would perform in the field. Since then, the situation has moved on. I'm aware that companies have been developing vaccines, more modern vaccines, vector-based vaccines, and vaccines that have been used outside the Union, but that may not have the full data package that we would require for a full marketing authorization in the Union. And I think we all understand that it's absolutely pivotal to understand what these new vaccines are and what we can expect in terms of performance, also to support the EFSA advice, because without that information, you cannot work on models for a vaccination strategy that may be effective. So that's the background for this survey. Now, are we thinking about bringing more guidance for the authorization of these, I would call them new generation vaccines? The new regulation does offer us the opportunity to have vaccines under exceptional circumstances, so we can look at data packages, reduced data packages. Obviously, for really new generation vaccines, it will be challenging, but the agency does have the intention to do that. First step for me would be to understand what is in the pipeline, what is being used outside Europe, what is the potential of these vaccines in order to advise the EFSA. And then obviously we open up the centralized procedures for looking at these vaccines more in detail, looking at the exact data packages, which could lead to an exceptional authorization of these vaccines, so that in the eventuality that the non-vaccination policy is broken up and that vaccination is allowed, and national member states can already do that in their own territory. But I think people are hoping that there will be steps made towards a more European policy, that indeed these vaccines, that we know about these vaccines, and that these vaccines can be made available. So in particular response to your question, I do realize that the maintenance costs of keeping these old vaccines on the market could be a blocker for having vaccines readily available. In an initial survey that has been published by the French agency, it is clear that indeed there are authorized vaccines out on the market, but there's very little stock of these vaccines, and we have no information on whether these vaccines would be matching with current circulating strains. So there's a lot of answers that we need to get out of this survey, and even more from looking at the actual data, I hope, in the future. It should have gone on the innovation topic, because I do think that new innovative vaccines could be a way forward there, but since we had some time here, the chair kindly provided me to take the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm Frederick. Okay, let's take the question from Anil Kumar, who is probably the one speaking because has been unmuted. Anil, could you please raise your question? Anil Kumar, please. Can you raise your question? You should be unmuted. Okay, doesn't look like a question. Maybe we'll have to, yes. Okay, if you have a question, please can you write it in the chat and we can address it. Just because we are running a bit late, but just a very final, very quick question probably to my colleague Emily that she can address very quickly. I hope, will it be a version 10 of the QRD in the near future? Please, Emily, over to you.
Thank you for the question. And I think to answer this question sensibly, the answer is not until after the 29th of January 2027, because we don't want to move the goalposts more than they need to be. So when we change version numbers of the QRD template, and I'm speaking on behalf of our QRD secretariat, who's not here today, but When we move, for example, from 8 to 9 or from 9 to 10, those are major version updates where we can expect substantial content changes. And we don't want to do that whilst everyone is in the 5-year exercise of aligning with version 9. As with just about everything else, in order to be ready in time, so that for the industry and the assessors, so that the template was already available back in, I forget now, at least a year and a half ago. It was, in a way, the minimum viable product of the QRD template at that point, so that we could make it available to everybody 6 months before the actual implementation date of the regulation. There were some issues that needed to be corrected. There were a few mistakes, which we're trying to do in as light a way as possible. So we have published a correction to version 9, but we've been very careful to call it a correction to version 9 and not version 10. So no, there won't be a version 10 until after the cut-off date, and not until after I retire, anyway.
Yes, I thought you were going to say over
Yes,
my dead body or
which
something.
is what I originally said.
Yes. Okay. So that's all the time. I'm sorry we have run a bit of time, but we have to come. We have time for coffee, and we are back at 11. Please, it's a bit less of time for coffee, but we have to continue with the program. Thank you very much to all. Right. So we are going to start again. Welcome back. Just to remind you a couple of housekeeping rules, please. All the presentations will be available in the webpage. The event is being recorded, so you're aware of that. Questions, please type them in the chat, and we will look at them and try to address as many as we can, either during the session or afterwards. We don't have the time. You are all muted. If at some point you want to ask questions, you will be unmuted at the time. And we will move to the next presentation. And in fact, it's the next session, which is on the topic of innovation. So it will be really interesting. And we have a presentation from Raffaele Bruno. And Raffaele is the Associate Director of Regulatory Affairs in Zoetis. And since 2019, he's the head of the European R&D Regulatory Affairs team, Pharmaceuticals at Zoetis. He has a veterinary degree and some post-degree studies. He joined Pfizer Animal Health at the time in 2011, and he has worked in the development of initial registration of various veterinary medicinal products for companion animals and livestock. And he's currently a member of the Animal Health Europe Regulatory Procedure Working Group. So welcome, Raffaele. Thank you very much for accepting to present today, and the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you, Noemi. I hope you hear me well, and thank you to the EMA for the info day, first of all. Very good information and perspective yesterday, today, and thank you for the opportunity to speak about an important topic, innovation, and the impact of the regulatory framework on innovation, on companies doing innovation, like the members of Animal Health Europe, and like my company, Zoetis. In this presentation, I will mention the new regulatory framework, and this essentially means the new regulation that we are speaking about, but I will also mention other regulatory pieces. Now, we are now in February 2023, which means it's 1 year since when the new regulation became applicable. Regulation containing new elements, new articles intended to stimulate innovation. Article 23 for limited market, Article 40 for the protection of technical documentation, special requirements for novel therapies, and a dedicated distinct category for biological, non-immunological, among others. But it's 1 year only 1 year, and it's too soon for a comprehensive retrospective analysis of the impact of this VMR on innovation. However, it is possible to share already today some reflections about the regulatory framework, how this framework could influence R&D decision. in terms of facilitation or also challenges to innovation. And these reflections today are based on real life experience, our experience in R&D, in decisions that we have to take in R&D, interactions with the agencies, new registrations, new claims, and also the additional clarity that we are getting and we are gaining as companies by discussing internally and externally with the agency. So I should have normally in a presentation table of content. I don't have, because these will be all reflections, as I say, based on real life experience. And the common element of these reflections is that they are relevant to innovation. Next. So one obvious question when the text of the new regulation became available to the public is this regulation future-proof with regard to innovation in veterinary medicine in Europe? Well, probably this is the aim of any new regulation, right? To be future-proof. I would like to start the reflections today by proposing to skip the answer for now. So if the question is this regulation future-proof? The question for now could be, it doesn't matter. No one has the crystal ball to foresee how innovation will look like in the future, and what will be the R&D decision that the companies will need to take in the future. What is more important is how to handle the hypothetical, but not so hypothetical scenario in which the new regulatory framework and the innovation in veterinary medicine don't really fit well to each other. So if they don't fit well to each other, how to handle those situations? Next, please. The new provisions in the new regulation text were shaped based on the knowledge, the therapies, the challenges that were known at the time of writing of the new regulation. And not all these provisions, definition, will be entirely applicable to innovations, as innovation cannot be always predicted in accordance to the general principle that you don't know what you don't know, or the correct interpretation of novel provisions by not be always clear-cut. So because of this, where necessary, the EMA might need to consult with the European Commission for the interpretation, other inputs about legal provision. This consultation step is also now included in the timetable of the scientific advice. The combination of a new regulation with new definition, new provision, and the advancement, innovation in veterinary medicine will probably increase this kind of interaction between EMA and the European Commission. And alignment is key to create a favorable environment for innovation. This dynamic, I'm not saying that this is a new dynamic, I'm just speculating and proposing that this dynamic, this is something that is going to happen now more than in the future, brings also new questions and hopefully also inputs for future actions. Next. So first, for example, in what occasions is appropriate or preferable to contact the European Commission before to contact the EMA about the interpretation of legal provision that could influence R&D decision? And in what occasions is more appropriate to do the opposite? Contact the EMA first and let the EMA interact with the European Commission. Now, in principle, none of the two options is more encouraged or forbidden. But if there are situations where it's more appropriate to contact the EMA, the European Commission first, then the question is, through what channels? And also, is the feedback from the European Commission going to follow specific timetables? We are talking about innovation, and predictable timing of inputs is fundamental for R&D. as I say, talking about experience, we know that when the questions are asked from the company or from the European Medicine Agency, the timing of inputs is not predictable. And guidance will be very helpful for that. Another point is there, what if the literal interpretation of new legal requirements or legal definition blocks the further developments of innovative therapies? I like to be clear here. I'm thinking at, when I say obstacles, blocks, I'm thinking at unintended obstacles. Unintended obstacles that the lawyer will say they are not in the spirit of the law. The regulation was not intended to block certain therapies. So innovation is often one step further than the legal framework. And because of this mismatch that can happen, the impediment to innovation from the regulatory framework could be the unintended side effect of the regulation. I think in this audience we understand the metaphor of side effect. So how to handle such a situation? What if an innovative therapy is potentially safe, efficacious, needed for animal health, for public health, but it just doesn't fit the current regulatory framework? And the obstacle to market is not technical, it's not because of a lack of efficacy or a lack of safety, but purely legal. So a favorable climate is when these unintended obstacles are quickly addressed, which means in some occasions, and this has been mentioned yesterday, adapting the regulatory framework, but it was referred to a different topic, in a timely fashion. And again, this requires alignment between all the stakeholders, industry, EMA, and European Commission. And so yesterday, a good point was raised about the fact that acknowledging that optimization might be necessary, but on the other hand, things take time, right? This was the quote. I fully agree, things take time. When this principle is, however, applied to innovation, we need to be aware that time might result in a termination of projects because investment in certain areas cannot really wait. So I'm talking about obstacles and where these obstacles could be. Next. So it's certainly positive that the Annex 2 contains a section dedicated to novel therapies, allowing deviations from the standard dataset. Innovative therapies, however, enter the market already under the old directive. I'm thinking at cell therapies, monoclonal antibodies. Moreover, deviations from the Annex 2 were accepted if properly justified. And this is the case still today with the new Annex 2. So the obstacle to innovation are unlikely to be in the Annex 2 or in the absence of guidance in Annex 2. Next, please. No, please stay on the previous slide. However, the industry cannot deviate from the definition, the provisions that are in the regulation. So where the obstacle could be, the absence of guidelines, the absence of specific section is not necessarily an obstacle. Scientific advice from the agency, very useful, and also a pragmatic approach from both the agency and the companies can help, can fill the gap. So next. It is the presence of hard requirements in the regulation that could negatively impact innovation, like the lack of guidance, and in some occasions even more than the lack of guidance. And this is because there is no flexibility. The companies, like the agency, we talked about that yesterday, cannot deviate from the regulation text. So a couple of examples just to give Just to give example in the definitions, antimicrobial definition, if the definition as a broad interpretation, antimicrobial restriction will be applied to also to non-antimicrobial product blocking innovation. Definition of new active substance, if the interpretation is too restrictive, the central procedure becomes mandatory also for VMPs that are intended for very limited geographic areas. Some vaccine, for example, in certain species like fishes, again, fish like and others, blocking innovation. But we also have positive recent experience as well. Next, please. And this has been quoted yesterday, that the new regulation can be also relatively quickly amended in case of evident issues. And one example is the Article 152 about the deadline for compliance on the new labeling requirements, but also the unintended requirement of GLP to preclinical efficacy studies. As soon as this was spotted, CVMP immediately published a statement, and the European Commission took action, and this has been quickly resolved. Now, these two examples have something in common. They were both unintended obstacles, unintended challenges. So the hope is that similar quick actions can be taken also for unintended obstacles blocking or creating challenges to innovation. Next, as a separate but related topic for novel therapies, there is certainly value in having high-level technical guidance early enough, but in some areas, a detailed guidance, too detailed, developed too quickly, could also represent a challenge. This is where a balance should be found. Next, so the initial question was, is this a future-proof regulation? I'd like to change this question next into a different question. What if it is not a future-proof regulation? And the answer is that companies doing innovation need next flexibility of the regulatory framework, and a joint effort among all the stakeholders, the agency, the European Commission, and the industry, to quickly address the problems and to look for to achieve really the common goal of the regulation, which is innovation, facilitating innovation. Next, please. The industry recognized the scientific support to development offered by the agency, and this is very much appreciated and very useful. Companies can establish a dialogue on technical aspects through Innovation Task Force, through the scientific advice. Now, from the perspective of innovator companies, there is not the feeling that communication channels are missing, because scientific advice is used very often with valuable feedbacks. Good news are useful. Bad news are useful. And the agency personnel is respond very quickly to provide guidance. Now, additional benefit could come from an additional flexibility in the scopes of these communication channels. And I'd like to focus on the scientific advice with some reflection. There is a guideline available to explain what type of questions are appropriate, what questions are not appropriate. It's acceptable to ask advice about study design for studies that are not yet conducted, but it's not acceptable to ask general advice or pre-assessment of data. However, these scopes limitation don't seem to be mandated by the legal basis of the scientific advice in the regulation 726/2004. The scope of the scientific advice question could potentially be expanded in special cases without conflict with the legal basis, as long as the question remains scientific, because this is what the regulation asks, to have a scientific question. On top of that, we know that several companies would like to have more opportunities for informal interactions, like phone calls, for example, outside the formal channels of the scientific advice and the ITF. Okay, so these are some general reflection, and I am going to move to some more specific. Next, please. Yeah, indeed, as I said at the beginning, these new regulations are some articles that are specifically intended at stimulating innovation, like Article 23, Article 40. For Article 23, as soon as it became evident that the new Article 23 and limited market could not entirely replace the minor use, minor species concept, the CVMP quickly announced a guidance for products intended for limited market, but that they are not eligible for Article 23. And this action filled a gap, and it is very welcomed by the industry. It increased predictability, and therefore it has a positive effect on innovation. It is unfortunate that there is no guidance about data reduction for Part 2. It's not clear whether this is a temporary or a definitive situation. For Article 40, about the prolongation and additional period of protection of technical documentation, there is a reflection paper now in draft that will help companies to meet the expectation of Article 40.5. Again, this increased predictability, and therefore, as a consequence, has a positive effect on innovation. Again, a couple of considerations with regard to Article 40.5, connecting with the general principle that the industry needs flexibility and predictability to do innovation. Next, please. Next. Yeah. Article 40.5 is complementary to the regulation and provides specific and useful examples. It is recognized, however, that this reflection paper and any future guidance cannot cover all the cases. The document does not mention scientific advice as a tool to verify the validity of a strategy to meet the expectation of Article 40.5, but I presume that the scientific advice option is not precluded. But a hypothetical scientific advice, which has the aim of verifying the validity of a strategy or a data set in relation to Article 40.5, could potentially conflict with the current scopes of the scientific advice, either because pre-assessment of data might be required, or because the question could be interpreted as a pre-assessment of classification or eligibility, and we know in the past the EMA did not accept such questions. Again, as stated before, flexibility in the type of scientific advice questions that can be accepted by the CVMP will help the applicants to understand whether investment makes sense in this area. Then another point, next please. Article 40.1 and Article 40.2 can be only requested within 3 years of the expiry date of the protection of technical documentation. But Article 40.5 could be requested anytime, even when the protection of the technical documentation has expired and the generics already entered the market. So the question is, what is the impact then on generic? It is understood that only the variation covered by the Article 40.5 is protected. Therefore, probably the generics will be able to stay on the market, but without the variation protected by Article 40.5. This is speculation. I don't think, to my knowledge, there is an explicit guidance for that. But this means that the stimulus to innovation is clearly smaller from this article. But then another consideration, if generics will be allowed to stay on the market, that means that there is a reference product that filed a variation covered by Article 40.5, demonstrated a better benefit-risk profile, an improved benefit-risk profile, or a reduced risk of resistance or of antimicrobial resistance or antiparasitic resistance. So is it appropriate to maintain on the market both products, one with a better profile and the other with a better benefit-risk profile, and the other with a less favorable benefit-risk profile? I do recognize that these are not scientific questions. These are probably questions that require a legal input, again, for example, from the European Commission. Then another point is what will happen with the data in case of SPC harmonization. I presume that this data, the data covered by Article 40.5, will not enter the SPC harmonization. It's an assumption. There is no official guidance for that. Having guidance will help. Next, please, again with specific comments, and this I have to thank that Biological Working Party of Animal Health Europe for providing these inputs and these comments. These are additional challenges to innovation in the field of immunologicals. Now, the vaccine platform technology master file and the vaccine antigen master file are very welcome new concept by the industry, as predictability of assessment is increased and there is potential for cost savings, and they are both clearly positive for innovation. On the other hand, the administrative burden should not reduce the value of the incentive. For example, the several variations that are needed for every variation of the vaccine antigen master file. Then additional notes about vaccine and innovation, but not really related to the new vet regulation. The guideline for association of vaccine is notoriously difficult as it requires the replication of almost the full clinical program for associated vaccine. There is a specific proposal from the industry on association of vaccine, and this is under consideration. Then there is probably value in relaunching the vet vaccine initiative. And there are also some challenges with some European pharmacopoeia monograph, particularly in case of new or improved vaccine, and this can create challenge to innovation. Opportunity for more direct interaction with EDQM will be beneficial. Going back to the new elements introduced by the new vet regulation, next please. There has been a change in terminology in the new regulation from positive therapeutic benefits to positive effects. And this opens new potential benefits that can be considered in the benefit-risk evaluation. However, the confirmation of the validity of these new benefits or effects is needed to really boost innovation. And some examples are there. Quality of life claims, what is in human medicine health-related quality of life claims, the benefit of the group or of the herd versus traditional individual benefit. This was in the reflection paper of EMA 2025, was mentioned there, and to my understanding is not in the new documents from CVMP about benefit risk. I hope it will be addressed somewhere. then indication for use in healthy animals, like it was for the zootechnical use, the value of additional benefits versus the direct therapeutic benefits in the overall assessment, and then claims of reduction of antibiotic use that has been, this point has been mentioned yesterday in the presentation from Dr. Schefferly. It's clear that this will go into the benefit risk new guidance. Next, so while talking about the new vet regulation, we can identify positive elements and some elements creating challenges, right? Unfortunately, when we go beyond the new regulation, we only see challenges outside the new vet regulation. That's the reality, and particularly recently. I will conclude with a positive remark. It's not good to conclude with a negative remark. So, but I need to address what is going on beyond the new vet regulation. Next, please, and I'm gonna really just to list them. The titanium dioxide. This is potential ban of use. Is a very European topic. We're talking about innovation in Europe. This is a very European topic. Substances that are restricted or banned under REACH, like Triton X and PFAS, which has impact on both products and location of manufacturing sites. There has been recent publication about PFAS, and the implication needs a careful analysis. The European PBT assessment criteria that are detrimental to some types of products relevant to innovation. The new packaging and waste legislation with additional labeling requirements. The One Substance, One Assessment initiative, which is in principle a good initiative, but there could be some implication when exchange of data may mean reuse of data by other companies, or quick publication of the full dossier in the public domain, like it happens with the feed additives. And then there is an over-regulation sometimes in some member states about clinical trials for the authorization, also for the quality and the importation requirements of investigational products. Next, and to conclude really, yes, positive elements could be identified within the new regulation. But there are also new questions and new challenges. And what innovators look for is a favorable environment. And this can be created by increasing predictability of assessment and therefore of the investment, flexibility intended from different perspectives. Flexibility could be of the regulatory framework on one hand, but also flexibility of communication between companies and the agency, the EMA, but also flexibility in terms of communication between companies and the European Commission. And finally, alignment. Alignment is very important. It's not enough that everybody is doing their own job very well. We need to be aligned for the common goal, which is to innovate and to bring new, safe, and efficacious medicines for animals in Europe. And with this, I thank you for the attention, and I pass again to Noemi. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefano. I think it has been a very thorough and honest presentation. And thank you for finishing with a positive message. And I guess that's why we're here, to have this dialogue and among all ourselves. So now we have time for an open discussion. And I have seen there are a few questions in the chat. So what we could do is address some or all of the questions, if we can, and then we can open for a more, I guess, informal discussion within those of you connected virtually. You can raise your hand at any point here in the room, and maybe we can establish a bit of that dialogue that we were referring to. Maybe we can start with a question, and the first one regarding this topic maybe I can address. And it's from Madens, and it says the current guideline for potency assay for novel therapies such as the cell therapies is an example where setting guideline with detailed scientific description may introduce unintended obstacles due to literal interpretation of the BMR, to registration of innovative mechanisms of action that are not by definition described and known, and revisiting correct dogma. Could you please discuss this point? And I can respond saying that this guideline, I don't know if you're all aware, that has been drafted by the Novel Therapies and Technologies Working Party, is currently in consultation period. So I would say that please send your comments because they will be taken into consideration for sure. So if you have any comments to the guideline, please send them. There's still some time, I think, to receive comments. The other thing I wanted to say is that the guideline was drafted, as you have noticed, after there's some experience with authorization of this type of products. There are already 3 or 4 stem cell products authorized, and that experience was taken into consideration when drafting the guideline. So hopefully, we are not adding any obstacles to the authorization. That wasn't the objective at all. But please send comments. There was a question, sorry, I'm going to come back to your presentation, Raffaele, because there was a question, I think, in the, let me see, slide 4, I think it was, where you were referring directly to communication with the Commission. And the Commission representative very kindly has agreed to address your question directly. So I'm going to pass the floor to Rocío, and maybe you can ask her, or she already knows what the question was. Please, Rocío, thank you.
Yeah, so the question is about when stakeholders should come to the Commission?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, my advice would be that it is preferable that you first reach to the European Medicines Agency, because we can only give a very general interpretation that would be no different to what it might be found in the guidelines or general documents, but that's not what is going to be helpful to you. What is going to be helpful to you is the application of a general principle to your specific case, and that requires an assessment that is not done by the Commission, but is done by the agency. So I would say 99% of cases you will save time if you come for advice to the European Medicines Agency.
And thank you. Can I ask? And about the timing?
The timing, the Commission has certain rules that we need to provide answers. I think it's within 15 or 20 working days. So there is a deadline by which we give responses, and it's usually quite quick. But you might not like the response, in the sense that if we are discussing something in the network with other authorities, you might get a question, yeah, this is something that is being considered, and it will be reflected in whatever document, for example. So you might not like the answer, but you will get an answer in a relatively short period of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Rocío. There's a question here in the room, so I'm going to pass the floor to Elsa Vecino. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Noemi, and thank you, Raffaele, for the presentation. I would like to comment on the point made on Article 40.5. It's quite a complex article, and we know that the CVMP is working hard on guidelines and establishing the criteria. Further than that, we have expressed the same concerns that Raffaele has regarding regulatory consequences and practical aspects on the market. So once again, we plea, perhaps once again to Alfonso, please take our views when drafting the notice to applicants, because I think that perhaps provisions will be there. And regarding the points made by Raffaele in his presentation, he's referring to new marketing authorizations or reference products and competitive issues with generics. But the legislation, in fact, Article 36 and the preamble made these provisions extensive to any existing marketing authorization, regardless of the registration pathway. So it could be the other way around, that these data protection is given to an existing product, which is not necessarily a reference product. So I think the wording should have been different, and it's vice versa applicable independently of the nature of the product in terms of registration pathway. So just as a clarification, and again, I don't know if it's a guidance to applicant or separate Q&A or whatever, but I think all these rules would need to be addressed somewhere. So thank you.
Yeah, so thank you. We are taking note of all these issues that require clarification, and this is something that we are at present discussing in the context of the future guidance to applicants.
Thank you, both. There was a hand raised in the audience. Maybe it was Johan, Elsa, and you have already. Is there any other hand? I can't see anything else. Elsa is unmuted, but Elsa is already. You have already. Yeah. Okay. Good. Thank you. Just trying to clarify. Good. So we will come back to the chat and the questions in the chat. Sorry, I'm trying to go to the next one. And there is one that maybe Ivo Klassen wants to address, which says, it would be interesting to know if the agency's vet unit has taken early lessons learned from the human unit with respect to the process and authorization of urgent medicines, such as the COVID-19 vaccines. Ivo, would you like to take this one, please?
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for that question. And I seem to remember that that we had a discussion at a TOPRA meeting on that as well. I mean, when you look at the COVID-19 lessons learned for the regulatory network, it did show that there is this flexibility under extreme circumstances to make changes into the way that we look at how dossiers are being submitted and how they are evaluated. And I think the rolling review was one of those new mechanisms that was introduced under extremely urgent situations. However, when you look at the lesson learned, it also shows that that put quite a lot of pressure on the system. So it's not a mechanism that anyone is in favor of developing for the more regular authorization of processes. Also, there were other incentives there, like free scientific advice for those products that were there, both for antivirals as well as for medicines that were used in intensive care under these extreme circumstances. But I think most prominently was the pressure put on the development of new vaccines. That was only possible also with a lot of financial investment and risk-taking from the industry and from authorities in that sense. Now, what have we learned from it, and are we looking at it as a future tool for authorization of, let's call it, priority medicines? And the answer to that is yes, we are looking into that. We are looking into how can we incentivize, for example, the development of new antimicrobials. That's more prominent on the human side, because I think the market for new antimicrobials per se on the veterinary side, given the reality of the system, is maybe not there. But it could also be looked at, are there opportunities for supporting the development of, let's say, veterinary medicinal products that can replace or can reduce the use of antimicrobials. And if you then look at what is helpful in that respect and what is the role of the agency, I think it also answers one of the other questions that is put here. Do we have enough tools for early interaction with developers? Early interaction with developers, now we have ITF, and then the following step usually is scientific advice, but is it imaginable that we develop regulatory tools that are filling the gap between an ITF and scientific advice? Are we willing to look into not only early interaction, but let's say a continuous interaction with developers throughout the life cycle of a product or up until the moment that it actually gets authorized? So how can we, as regulatory networks, support and facilitate access to the market for promising products? And should we do that by also be early interactors in EU-funded research projects, for example, or deciding on which are promising products? So those are things that we are currently discussing. And I'm not saying that they will materialize at any time soon, because as I said yesterday, they will have to fit in with what is the regulatory framework. But it's certainly something that we see as an area where the agency and the regulatory network have a role to play. So the development of new antimicrobials, new classes of antimicrobials for human, but also for veterinary use. And where we do feel that we don't have the regulatory toolbox now or cannot take the necessary actions to do it. And that's learned from COVID, that if you really want to do something, if there's a crisis, so if AMR is being seen as the next pandemic, then we should open up that toolbox and start using it. I hope it answers the question.
Thank you, Ivo. I hope so too. Let me come back to a presentation. To a question that was raised before, and we left for this part of the session because it's more relevant, and it's from Frederick Descamps, and it says, "Thank you, blah blah blah." Question regarding the innovation topic. Could you please provide an update on the discussions around the definition of a new active substance with pet vaccines in mind in the context of procedural authorization route? And he says, and I think it was also mentioned by Rafael in his presentation, if the definition is too broad, it may lead to mandatory requirement to have the vaccines authorized centrally versus national DCP or MRP. Including those that are only to be sold in one of very few member states, for instance, fish vaccines, and are not fitting the mandatory scope. Otherwise, in this case, the registration and maintenance fees may become prohibitive and have some impact on the pet vaccine availability in absence of any obvious technical reasons. So I can provide an update on this, and I guess you are aware that there is currently a working group that includes experts from the CVMP and also CMDB working in a guidance to provide some definition on what could be considered a new active substance for veterinary vaccines in the context of the eligibility for the centralized procedure, as Frederick was referring to as well. The activity is going, I would say, slower than we thought it could be, and this is because we have made aware of some potential implications in relation to intellectual property and patent protection, and we are discussing them at the moment just to make sure that it doesn't have any impact on other areas that we have not been foreseen before. So it's still work ongoing, that's what I want to say, and that's the update we want to provide. But of course, we will consider these comments received when continue the work in this area. So let me come back to the questions. I can't see any hands raised. No. In the room, no, I can't see anything. So I will come back to the chat and see what other questions we have there. There is another one in relation to the guideline cell therapy, and it says guideline for improving predictability or regulatory consequences of manufacturing process changes in cell therapy would be much welcome, considering the paramount importance of the process to define the product's efficacy and safety profile. So what I can say is that we can, of course, take this feedback back to the group of experts. Hopefully, again, the guideline that is out for consultation will address some of these issues and may help, and hopefully will help. But we will take that feedback with us. Thank you. One interesting question from Katrina Stirling from Suetis. Do the EMA or Commission have any thought on how we can facilitate faster availability for innovative medicines for unmet medical need that do not meet the criteria for Article 23 or Article 25 for data reductions in the absence of any conditional licensing mechanism? And I guess, yeah, it's an interesting question, Katrina. Yeah, I guess I agree. You know, we don't have the concept of conditional marketing authorizations in the veterinary framework. Of course, you refer already to Article 25 authorizations under exceptional circumstances, but I'm understanding that this kind of product wouldn't fit within that context, and it wouldn't fit under limited markets, Article 23. It could be that the product could be eligible for, so it could be classified as a limited market under Article 4, but not Article 23. And as it has been mentioned already, there's some guidelines being drafted for that kind of product. So watch the space, because those will be published, and hopefully that will also provide some guidance when developing these kind of products. Apart from that, yeah, I don't think there is that much we can say, or at least I can think of anything else to answer in that regard. I don't know if any of my colleagues would like to intervene. Doesn't seem the case. So we'll keep going. And the next question is from Madden's. Informal interactions after scientific advice for novel therapies would be much appreciated indeed. Okay, so I think we have had this comment before in the context of, yes, and I think Rafael also referred to it. There is a possibility of requesting an ITF meeting for novel therapies, which are going to provide some guidance at the very beginning of the development of a product. This is a more informal discussion, which will include experts from the network, and it will help when designing the next steps, clinical program, some manufacturing aspects. Then after that, we would be moving to scientific advice, and as the name say, it is more aimed to address those scientific points that companies may have while developing, again, clinical programs or manufacturing issues. Then, of course, there is a possibility of a pre-submission meeting, and I guess it would be the next logical step once we have a good idea of you know, what the product is, the clinical package, the dossier. You are very welcome to ask for a pre-submission meeting through the agency, and we would involve the rapporteurs if they are already appointed, and some you know, experts from the agency, and try to guide you and resolve those issues that may be pending. Then, apart from those, I can't think of any other forum that we have for this kind of discussions. Of course, if we are referring to novel products, innovative medicines, technologies, and if there's any regulatory challenge on this, we would be happy to try to help you to resolve those. But yeah, those are the tools that we have available at the moment. But of course, we are always open to a dialogue if that is not providing you, I guess, the guidance that you need. Let me see. There's a response from Katrina to my response. This does, that says that we appreciate the challenge with this, but it does limit Smith for markets for products like unmet needs for major species. Okay, yeah, I see the point, but I guess there is nothing else we can say on that. There is a new one. Let me see. I don't know, Ivo, I'm going to read a question, put you on the spot, because it just came, and it's from Frederick Descamps. As mentioned in the presentation from Raffaele, industry sees a benefit in relaunching the vet vaccine availability initiative, which was good in the past and delivered good outcomes, and was very useful. Any feedback on this proposal? Maybe you know better than anyone.
No, thank you, Frederick, for that question. I do remember that we once had a task force on availability of authorized vaccines. I think there was and it was a good group. And we, for some reason, that group stopped meeting. I think it was deprioritized during the business continuity process of the agency, which doesn't mean to say that there's not a need for that. The agency is now coming out of BCP after first having had BCP for the move from London to Amsterdam and subsequently because of COVID. So that could be a good opportunity to look again into this task force and have it starting again. So yeah, we'll look into it. I think it will be a useful exercise to discuss a number of topics related to veterinary vaccines availability.
Thank you very much, Ivo. I think those are all the questions in the chat. Let me see. There's any hands raised? No. Okay. Any questions in the room? Any follow-up questions to the questions or responses provided? Yes, Rick, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm. As we come to the end of this info day, I'm thinking what the conclusions are and how we move forward. And there are, of course, many detailed plans and planning going into the ongoing developments in the UPD, etc. There's the, groups looking at prioritization of the next functionalities and all that. But I'm looking a little bit deeper than that, because we've had a year of transition, a year of minimal viable product, a year of unprecedented effort by all, and great progress has been made, and we've reached a certain point. And we always put this info day in the calendar knowing this would, after 1 year of applicability of the regulation, this is a good point to sit and assess where we are. And we're now going to put another info day in the calendar for next year, and that will be another good point to assess progress. And in yesterday's discussions, we talked about looking at some metrics in order to be able to measure that. So that's for next year. But I need to talk about the administrative burden objective. And you might be wondering, why does industry keep banging on about that? Well, it's not the only objective we are interested in. We're also very interested in the innovations objective. But I want to park that for now, because I think the metrics around that are easier to handle with the product database, and because it's perhaps too early to assess where we are with some of those provisions, the progress that has been made, as Raffaella explained. But on administrative burden, we can already see a bit what's happening, not totally. But the other reason why we keep going on about it is because in the Commission's original impact assessment, this was identified as one of the major areas that we need to address. The Commission's own data put our administrative burden in the veterinary sector as double that in the human sector. So that is why it became a primary objective to reduce it. Now, we've heard today that we haven't achieved that yet. Administrative burden at the moment is perhaps higher, certainly has not been reduced than under the previous directive. Part of that is minimal viable product. We're still developing the necessary functionalities and teething problems, learning as we go along. So some of this will be worked out of the system in this second year of transition or embedding, as Tony put it. But in addition to that, I am picking up talk within industry circles of perhaps some over-engineering of the procedures. So we can work on the teething problems, we can add functionalities, but what I want to know is there, have we built in some administrative burden that will not be reduced by that? And if so, how do we address that in the future years in order to reach that objective of fulfilling the full potential of reducing administrative burden? Now, I think some of this over-engineering is also partly due to the learning, maybe a lack of trust in the systems or the functionalities aren't there. So perhaps some of it is necessary and unavoidable. But the question in my mind is then, how do we address that in the future as we learn and as we can improve and refine things? We have procedures written down now. How do we go back and look at those and change them? And when do we do that? What would be the appropriate timing around that? So next year will be a very interesting day again, I think, when I hope we can perhaps look at some of these things. Metrics has been mentioned. If we are to monitor how we improve, we probably needed a benchmark now. And I've said this in the past, Ivo, as you know. So I'm curious to know now how we will measure progress without that benchmark, because we probably should have done it in 2019. And this is industry's fault as much as anybody else's. So those are the questions in my mind now, looking into 2023. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think there's very good conclusions and thoughts to throw at the end of the day. And because Ivo is going to close the meeting, maybe I will pass the floor to him and he can have his own conclusions and thoughts through also to end the session. Ivo, please.
No, thank you, Rick, for already summarizing the conclusions of the meeting and the challenges for next year. It's always well appreciated. Yeah, for me, the pleasant task to close this meeting and look back at the past 2 days, so yesterday afternoon and this morning. I think we had very good discussions, a lot of questions in the chat as well, and I see that some of those questions have not been addressed because probably they're not the right place to address it here. Some of them, others will be addressed later, I suppose. But the discussions were, in that sense, very good. We provided an update on where we are at this moment, also recognizing all of us that we have delivered both from the side of the industry as from the side of the agency regulators, that we've made progress, that we're still in that transition phase, and that we should keep sharp. And also Rick rightly summarized it in that we need those metrics. We don't have the benchmark of where we were when we started the process, but I think we can still start building it and keep a sharp eye on how can we continuously improve the system? How can we get rid of the administrative burden? Where we should be very careful is that it is really a reduction of administrative burden overall and not moving admin burden from one stakeholder to the other stakeholder. So if we move the admin burden from regulators to the industry or the other way around, overall there's no net gain. And what was intended for the regulation? So what is the key to reducing admin burden? It is simplification. And simplification, a reduction of unnecessary regulatory actions that we need to do, or that the companies need to do, but also simplifying the processes as much as we can. And it would have been brilliant, and we would have been geniuses if we had designed all these processes from the start on to be the simplest way possible. That has not happened. So I do agree with Rick that some of those processes may be, let's say, perceived as over-engineered, or maybe actually over-engineered, and we should look for simplification. Another way to avoid or to reduce admin burden is to really look into where can we avoid duplication of procedures. So if we have agreed on centralization of certain procedures, what is the value in repetition of these procedures at the national level? I think this is not benefiting anyone. And if we see that a lot of procedures are carried out at the national level, have we really looked into can they be centralized in one way or the other, or can they be more effective? So it's also one of those topics that has been brought up several times, by the way, which I think is for industry to discuss also with member states and probably with the Commission, is about harmonization. How do we harmonize? We've got one single regulation, but we still have a lot of national legislation and national requirements that may request companies to submit both sales data at the national level, and very often in a different way than they have to submit sales data into the UPD. That leads to an unnecessary duplication of tasks because of national legislation. Not much we as an agency can do about it, other than say we see it and possibly we should work on that. I think we've seen we are progressing in that sense, because what we've seen in Daniel's presentation is that we've evaluated the process for signal management. After a year, we came to the conclusion that this was not the right process, and revising it. We're still in the pilot phase for the signal management expert group, meaning that that pilot will be evaluated at the end of 2023 or early 2024, and then we have an opportunity to look: is this the process in the way that we want to run it for the future, or do we still need to make adaptations to that process? And in that evaluation, we would also like to take into account experiences from the industry and other stakeholders. I think that's an important element of that evaluation before we continue on this path. And you've seen in the presentation that we are making progress in that respect. And I would like to thank Tony as well for giving a positive message that he does see the evaluation of the process. I think that's an important message for us as well. But we need to continue that interaction with you, the industry, to further fine-tune it. I would also like to thank Bruno on his presentation on innovation in Europe. When we started discussing this innovation day, I specifically asked, can we bring some positive messages? I would like to hear about ideas how we can bring it forward, rather than listening to what is not okay in the regulation and where it blocks innovation. And I think so. Thanks a lot for doing that, because I think this is really stimulating the discussion and stimulating us and saying, okay, where is it that we can fine-tune? And I mean, we cannot decide on amending the regulation. That's a totally different level. and I'm not sure that what you put there as unintended, let's say, effects of the regulation was maybe an unintended effect, but it may be an intended article in the regulation for totally different reasons. So let's start that discussion. Let's see where we can take it. Yesterday we saw the presentation by AVC and Access VetMed, and again, you know, helping us in improving the system and bringing messages on where we can improve and what the experiences are. And in that sense, this Info Day, I think, has delivered big time on what the objectives were. What remains? We're looking forward to having an Info Day meeting next year. We've already penciled it in after the March CVMP meeting, so it's on the 14th and 15th of March. Question yesterday was, can we have it as a face-to-face meeting? I've just during the break I showed to Rick the room for which we have a claim to do that meeting. It's already reserved for that Info Day. So if the agency decides to have more large-scale stakeholder meetings, we've got a room reserved for approximately 350 people. Now, I don't expect that we will see 350 people there. It's the auditorium and the combined room. But I do hope that we will see more, we'll be able to receive more people from industry and other stakeholders here at the agency. And it will be run as a hybrid meeting. And yesterday I said that we had about 1,100 potential participants registered. I think we've seen about 700 online throughout both days. So it shows great interest. And if we can, let's say, receive here 100, 120, 130 people, allow them to the networking opportunity with CVMP members, EMA staff, CMDV members, and we have a 300 to 400, 500 people online, I think we can call it a success again. And we will start looking into what need to be the topics on that Info Day next year. So what remains in the closing remarks is to thank all the chairs and all the presenters for the excellent presentation and for chairing. I made a specific note here that I should really thank the backup team. So sitting behind me, those are the people that make it absolutely work in this sense. So Sylvia, Alejandro, and Katarina, who's remotely connected, they make sure that we are able to see all your questions, that we are able to divide all the questions, that all the connections with the people online work well. And I think this meeting has gone by without any hiccups. So a bit of applause for you. And with that, unless there are any burning questions in the room or online, I would like to close this meeting. Meeting closed.